You can't really scroll through the news these days without seeing something about bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. It feels like this constant drumbeat.
It's definitely a very prominent theme, isn't it, in our current political discussions?
Yeah.
This kind of yearning to see American manufacturing flourish again.
Yeah, and it really made me think when you sent over that article, the one called Make Work Manly Again.
Yeah.
Because we hear so much political talk, often with this very specific focus on traditionally masculine industries, about these jobs coming back. But the real question, the one that just jumps out from this material is, are these the kinds of jobs Americans actually want anymore?
That really is the core tension we need to dig into, yeah. You've got this political aspiration often framed in, very particular terms.
Right.
Kind of bumping up against the realities of today's American workforce.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that this isn't just one person's opinion. The article pulls from polls, expert analysis. So what I'm hoping we can really get into is this disconnect. Why is there such a strong push for this manufacturing comeback? But why doesn't it seem like there's a huge line of people eager to jump into these roles?
Precisely. Our mission here is really to understand that gap, the gap between the political messaging and what's actually happening on the ground in the labor market. And this article gives us a really useful framework for that discussion.
Okay, good. So let's start with this whole idea of tariffs. The article talks about how they're being used, or at least presented, as a tool to try and, pull American manufacturing back home.
Right.
The thinking seems to be, let's get back to a labor situation that looked more like the 1950s.
So basically the theory, yeah. Tariffs, they're essentially taxes on imported goods.
Okay.
So the idea is if you make foreign products more expensive, then domestically produced goods become more price competitive.
Right. Levels the playing field, sort of.
Exactly. And that hopefully incentivizes American companies to bring production back, create those manufacturing jobs that, had moved overseas. There's definitely a strong element of nostalgia wrapped up in that approach.
And it's not just any kind of manufacturing, is it? The article specifically points to manufacturing, mining, construction sectors that, historically have been very male-dominated.
Absolutely.
And they carry this image,
right?
Physically demanding, manly.
Indeed. The way these jobs are framed is quite deliberate. The article even mentions a Fox News segment, I think, calling tariffs the ultimate testosterone boost.
Wow. Okay.
And that there was even this suggestion, apparently, that office work somehow makes you a woman. It's a rather old-fashioned and pretty narrow view of work, isn't it?
It's almost a caricature, but here's a really fascinating point from the article. A poll found that 80% of Americans, a huge majority, believe the U.S. would be better off with more manufacturing jobs.
Yeah.
So there's this general agreement on the idea of boosting manufacturing.
Yes. The public broadly sees the potential upsides. Maybe they're thinking about, national economic security or just overall job creation. It sounds good in theory.
But here's the kicker. That same poll showed that only about 25% of those people think they personally would be better off working in a factory. That's a massive difference, 80% versus 25%.
It really highlights a critical distinction, doesn't it, between the abstract idea that manufacturing jobs are good for the country and the individual desire to actually do that kind of work. We've seen just a huge shift in the preferences and the makeup of the American workforce over decades.
Absolutely. The article really emphasizes this major move away from, making tangible things towards the service sector, all those jobs in hospitality, tech, healthcare, where the focus isn't necessarily on creating a physical product.
And it's really crucial to get this. The decline in U.S. manufacturing isn't just about globalization and, cheaper labor elsewhere. Technological advancements have fundamentally reshaped the manufacturing process itself. Automation, robotics.
Yeah.
They've significantly reduced the number of people needed to produce the same amount of stuff.
That's such an important point. It's not just that jobs went overseas, the jobs themselves changed. Automation is a much bigger player now.
Exactly.
Which leads to this really insightful quote in the article from an economist, Kyle Handley. He kind of raises the possibility that maybe for some of those really tough, arduous manufacturing jobs, we're actually happy that nobody in the U.S. has to do that anymore.
That's a very provocative idea, isn't it? It suggests maybe it's a form of societal progress, that certain, physically grueling or less desirable tasks just aren't a main source of employment in a developed economy like ours anymore.
It really makes you think about what we value in work now. And then the article brings up that Dave Chappelle joke. Remember that from years ago?
Vaguely, yeah.
I want to wear Nikes. I don't want to make them shits.
Right. Okay, I remember now.
It's comedy, obviously, but it feels like it captures how a lot of people genuinely feel, you know?
It's a sentiment many can probably relate to, I think. People enjoy the products of manufacturing, the stuff we all use every day.
Sure.
But the actual labor involved in making it, often that doesn't hold the same appeal, especially when there are other, maybe more attractive career paths available.
Which brings us then to a pretty stark reality check. Apparently, we're facing a shortage of manufacturing workers right now. The article cites this report, April 2024, I think, saying roughly half of the nearly 4 million expected manufacturing job openings by 2033. Half of them are likely to go unfilled.
That's a huge number. We're talking possibly close to 2 million unfilled positions.
Yeah, so why?
Well, the reasons are complex. You've got a big chunk of the current workforce hitting retirement age.
Okay, the aging workforce.
Right. Then there's been a decline in immigration, which affects the labor pool. There's a lack of workers with the specific, often technical skills needed for modern manufacturing.
The skills gap.
Exactly. Yeah. And crucially, there are those changing career preferences we talked about, especially among younger folks, millennials and Gen Z.
Right. They've grown up in a totally different economy. Traditional factory work just doesn't seem to be the go-to option it might have been generations ago. And there's this really telling little story in the article about a car wash in Tennessee, I think it was, that was actually offering higher pay than a job at the nearby Nissan plant.
Wow. A car wash paying more than an auto plant job. That really flips the script, doesn't it?
It really does. It just challenges that whole nostalgic picture of manufacturing jobs as automatically being the high-paying, stable career.
And Colin Grobo from the Cato Institute makes a really sharp point about this. He says, basically, it's hard to reconcile this alleged great appetite for manufacturing jobs with the fact that we're struggling to fill all the manufacturing jobs we already have.
Exactly. If everyone supposedly wants these jobs back, why are so many empty? It doesn't quite add up.
It really doesn't.
Which leads into the next part of the article, this idea of the good manufacturing job. You know, the one people imagine: secure, good wages, a solid pension. That's the image, right?
That's definitely the idealized version, yeah. Often looking back to that post-World War II era, the sort of golden age for certain industries. But the reality is modern manufacturing jobs, on average, they don't necessarily hit those marks anymore. The article points out that average earnings in manufacturing are now actually lower than the overall average earnings for all U.S. workers.
Lower. Wow, okay, that's significant.
It is. And a big factor in that shift, the article argues, is the decline in union membership.
Ah, right. Unions.
Historically, unions played a huge role in negotiating for better wages, benefits, worker protections in manufacturing. That's part of what made those jobs so attractive.
So fewer unions means potentially less bargaining power for workers.
Precisely. Josh Bivens from the Economic Policy Institute is quoted saying something really critical. Bringing back a manufacturing job is far from a panacea for job quality in the U.S. unless it comes with that strong union presence.
So just having a job title manufacturing worker doesn't automatically mean it's a great job anymore.
Not necessarily, no. A non-union manufacturing job today might look very different in terms of pay, benefits, and security compared to that mid-century ideal.
And, you know, it's easy to gloss over the downsides of those older jobs, too. The article kind of reminds us subtly about the dangers.
Oh, yeah. Safety wasn't always what it is now.
The often repetitive, monotonous nature of the work, the physical toll it took on people's bodies over years, those things get left out of the nostalgia sometimes.
Absolutely. That romanticized view often conveniently forgets the real hardships and the, frankly, lack of options many people had back then. Plus, our whole idea of what makes a good job has evolved too.
So, okay. If Americans aren't exactly banging down the doors for these older-style manufacturing jobs, and if robots can do a lot of the tasks now anyway, what is the future here? The article talks quite a bit about automation.
Yes, it really emphasizes that a lot of the jobs that got outsourced were precisely the ones American workers were least keen on anyway, the really repetitive, low-skill stuff.
Right.
And increasingly, even the tougher, more physically demanding jobs are being automated.
And it seems like the government kind of gets this. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick is quoted saying automation is actually part of the plan.
Intentionally so, yeah.
The goal isn't necessarily to bring back armies of assembly line workers, but more like have robots do the assembly, and have American workers building, maintaining, programming those robots.
That seems to be the vision. Jobs like mechanics, HVAC specialists, electricians, software people, a more tech-focused manufacturing workforce.
Okay, that sounds potentially more appealing maybe, but the article raises some big questions there too.
Definitely. There are significant unknowns. Like how many of these new tech-related jobs will actually materialize? Is it going to be enough to replace the old jobs?
Right. And will we have enough people with the right training, the right skills?
Exactly. And will people even want these jobs? Are they seen as attractive career paths?
Lydia Bussour from EY is quoted highlighting the need for a real reshuffling of the labor market. We need to tackle these skills gaps and shortages we already have in manufacturing.
It's not simple. You can't just flip a switch and suddenly have this highly skilled, tech-savvy manufacturing workforce ready to go.
No, it sounds like it needs huge investment in training, education, maybe changing how we even think about manufacturing careers.
Absolutely. And then looming over all of this is the bigger question of AI, right? How long before even some of these robot maintenance or programming roles could potentially be affected by AI advancements? That question from Colin Grabo keeps coming back. Are we bringing back jobs that have a great future?
It's such a critical point. Are we chasing nostalgia, or are we actually building something sustainable for the future economy? Now, the article does offer some other viewpoints. William Boom Bonvillian at MIT, for instance, he argues there are good reasons to bring back some manufacturing.
Right. He makes a case for specific types, things important for national security, like defense production, making sure we can build essential goods domestically.
Okay, that makes sense.
And he also talks about the economic benefit of keeping the actual production part of innovation here in the U.S., not just designing things, but making them too.
He also makes the point, didn't he, that modern manufacturing can be cleaner, less physically brutal than the old stuff.
Yes, and that it tends to create more indirect jobs, suppliers, logistics, etc., compared to the service sector.
And he suggests that if technology increases productivity, that could lead to higher wages in these advanced manufacturing roles. That sounds like a potentially better path forward.
It definitely presents a more nuanced picture. A revitalized manufacturing sector that's high-tech, focused on high-value production. And the article does note there's bipartisan interest in this kind of industrial policy.
Right. But there's skepticism, too, especially about just using tariffs as the main tool. Betsy Stevenson suggests that if the real goal is strong middle-class jobs, we probably need a much more targeted strategic approach than just broad tariffs.
A more focused strategy.
Which brings up another important point. The huge, undeniable need for jobs in other areas, like the care sector nurses, home health aides. Our population is aging rapidly.
That demand is massive and growing. You could argue those jobs represent more pressing current need than, say, making more widgets domestically that we already import easily.
Yeah, and Josh Bivens offers that interesting counter-perspective. Maybe we should focus on making those traditionally female-coded jobs, like in healthcare or education, better jobs. By encouraging more men to take them up, maybe, but also by improving conditions, pushing for unionization, setting higher standards and regulations for pay and benefits in those fields.
So instead of just trying to make manufacturing manly again, make these essential service jobs better for everyone.
Kind of, yeah. It challenges those old gendered ideas about work.
It definitely does.
So as we've been talking through this, and, for everyone listening, it's easy to feel that pull of nostalgia, that idea of a simpler economic time.
Sure, it has an appeal.
But this article really drives home how difficult, maybe impossible it would be to just turn back the clock. And even if we could, were those jobs really as universally great as we sometimes remember them?
That's a really crucial takeaway, I think. The political talk often hits that nostalgic note, that romantic return to manufacturing. But the underlying realities, or the workforce, the nature of the work itself, automation, they paint a very, very different picture today.
Okay, so wrapping this up, it seems this big push to revive manly manufacturing jobs is hitting some serious roadblocks.
Yeah.
There's a lack of real worker enthusiasm, right? A genuine labor shortage in the sector already. The jobs themselves often aren't the high-paying, secure roles of the past, and automation is just relentlessly changing the game.
Exactly. The nostalgia for that manufacturing-heavy past is understandable, but the economic world and what people want from their jobs today are just fundamentally different.
Which really leaves us with a final thought, maybe for you, our listener, to chew on. Given all this, what kind of jobs should we actually be trying to create and support for the future? How do we bridge this gap between what politicians are promising or maybe hoping for and what individuals actually want and need in their careers?
It forces us to think bigger, doesn't it? About skills training, about economic policy, maybe even about how we define a good job in the 21st century. It's not as simple as just saying bring back manufacturing.